Senator Cassidy.
Dr. Burrell, I always enjoy your conversations. What do you foresee for deep water oil production? I'm from Louisiana, so the Outer Continental Shelf, very important.
It is definitely very important. I talk about the shale today, as it is the big news around the world. But of course, the offshore, with the decreasing cost of deep water offshore technologies, it will play a growing role in both for United States and beyond, including Louisiana.
Have we reached that price point now where it is profitable to resume or to et cetera?
I think we need to see that either the cost needs to go down a bit more, or the prices remain a bit higher levels in order to have a very decent profits there. But we are almost there. We are close to the break-even points.
Now, you hear about energy, but you spoke a lot about carbon. One thing that seems to empirically have occurred when the EU began their cap-and-trade system and we began to regulate greenhouse gas emissions, there appeared to be a lot of carbon leakage to China and India. You're nodding your head yes. Yeah. And when you speak about their energy growth, it suggests to me that there will continue to be some carbon leakage, i.e. energy-intensive manufacturing moving to China. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, definitely. The EU is putting the climate change as the top priority in their energy and maybe economic policies, and they are making a lot of efforts to reduce the CO2 emissions. But the CO2 emissions coming from, I don't know, from Paris or from Jakarta or from Detroit or from Ottawa, it has the same impact on everybody.
Now, if they're not using, according to Mr. Manchin's question, if the coal-fired plants in China and India are not using scrubbers, whereas in Germany they are, it suggests to me that if we have carbon leakage from the EU, the United States to China, we actually end up with more global greenhouse gas emissions than we would if the industry stayed resident in the country of origin. Is that a fair statement?
I think it is going in the right direction, but what I mean is the following: we should do whatever we can do, but whatever we can do in the Germany or United States is not enough to reduce the CO2 emissions at the appropriate level.
No, I realize that, but my question is, if we put in a policy that merely causes a company to move energy-intensive enterprises to China, it sounds from your statements that we'll end up net worse globally because China does not use the same environmental standards techniques as do we.
It may well be the case, but I should tell you that India, China, Indonesia, they are also trying to reduce the emissions, but the main driver there comes from not from their concern about the climate change, their concern about the local pollution in the cities, which at the end of the day may help to reduce the CO2 emissions as well. But in any case, we have seen, for example, last year, global CO2 emissions once again increased, and the main drive of that increase came from Asia.
And again, carbon leakage would contribute somewhat to that. Just the point I...
Definitely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Let's see if I have any more time. I sure do. Next. You mentioned as well the carbon capture and sequestration. Do you see any use of captured CO2 being economically viable in the short or medium term?
Yeah. First of all, I believe carbon capture, utilization, and storage is perhaps the most critical technology we have now if we want to find a peaceful marriage between our global fossil fuel resources and our environmental objectives. And here we can both do two things, to capture the carbon and store it, or use the carbon. Many countries are working on to get money using carbon. There's a lot of research and development going there to put money on carbon, to make money out of carbon.
Do you see anything that is close to bearing fruit?
It is not yet there, to be very frank, but there's a lot of work going on. But I should also highlight that the scrubbers are mainly used to reduce the local pollution, and the CCUS is used to reduce the carbon, the so-called CO2 emissions. So there are two important technologies addressing two important environmental
problems. Real quickly, so I'm also gathering the degree to which the United States increases LNG exports to China, allowing them to use cleaner burning LNG, is the degree to which we can have a positive impact upon their global greenhouse gas emissions. Again, is that a fair statement?
Exactly. So what we have seen in the United States, for example, a big chunk of the major achievement of the United States in terms of historical drop of CO2 emissions was due to the using a lot of
And
gas.
that is despite
Gas.
methane leakage, because you mentioned methane leakage.
Yes, and it can happen also in China as well if the U.S. LNG replaces Chinese coal, which is very, very likely. But the precondition here is, as I mentioned, is the methane issue. So it is very important that we produce natural gas in a responsible way to minimize, if not nullify, the methane venting and flaring. And the United States and other countries are taking measures in order to minimize the methane emissions there.
I'm a minute over. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Cassidy. Senator